Hi, so this is actually the second part of my previous video in which I jumped in on the birth rate discourse. For those of who aren't aware, the birth rates for our species has been declining steadily since 1951. And some say that this means our population is in a critical state of diminishing to a detrimental level. However, as I had shown in my previous video on the subject, those fears were very overblown or misunderstood. I also linked the declining birth rate arguments to that of Western conservative ideology that tried to re-establish the nuclear family model and traditional gender roles into modern society. Because that's what this has always been about: control. Not the fear of the declining birth rates. Our population is already at a very healthy level, or well beyond that point, depending on how you look at things, as I had also shown in part 1. But me just summarizing my previous video isn't as fun, so just go and watch it. In this video, I'll be talking about the real life risks and consequences of having children, and why trying to coerce women to have more children, whether that be through legal means or societal pressure, is bad actually, and not just because of the lack of choice or freedom I mean, but also the health risks involved in having to navigate a very biased medical system that just simply doesn't favor those who must carry the child during pregnancy, as I'll be getting into later, as well as the financial strain of having children and the abysmal societal support that we have to do so. And just a little disclaimer, any women who are watching this who really want to have kids, maybe don't watch this, as I'll be focusing very heavily on the negative aspects of childbirth and pregnancy. And I don't want to be like discouraging anyone who really wants to have kids to not have them anymore. This video is all about pro-choice after all. However, if there's any men out there who really want to have kids, maybe you should keep watching this video, as there are many things in this I think you should learn. Anyways, with that, let's get on with the video. The fight for autonomy and control. A big part of a woman's freedom of autonomy was always the access to abortion and birth control. And as women were gaining these rights as the feminist movement rose over the decades, so too did the pushback rise from conservatives. In the US in 1973, women gained the legal right to abortion after a ruling by the Supreme Court in the famous case Roe v. Wade, in which a Texas woman sued to terminate a pregnancy. This was later overturned by a Mississippi judge in 2018, setting the new precedent that now it is up to the state whether abortion should be legal or not after the first 15 weeks, rather than make it a federal law. Now, nearly half the country has heavily restricted abortion or just downright outlawed it. Now, this seems to be just a conservative power grab to try and re-establish things before the feminist movement during the 50s and 60s, back when women had no rights and the nuclear family model was not just commonplace, but basically expected from nearly everybody, as I elaborate further on in part 1. But what are their arguments and justifications in this? Well, the standard case to ban abortion really is just the notion that life starts at conception and not birth, which began as one of many beliefs deep-rooted in Catholicism, fundamental to the traditional conservative ideology. And here's a photo of me when I was just 10 months old. Aw, you're adorable! And now this one is a picture of me right at the moment of my conception. Dude, why do you have this? So I ask, should an undeveloped fetus have an equal amount of value of human life to that of anyone post-birth? Why is its safety prioritized over the well-being, health, and freedom of the one who carries it? No, because to these people, a woman's body is just a baby maker, and any other way that she wishes to live her life is secondary. Of course, in the West, more and more people are rejecting religion, including some of those on the right, but these traditional core beliefs still remain. When discussing abortion, a common argument that I've seen from many men online goes along the lines of something like, if the relationship is equal, then the man should get an equal say whether she keeps the child or not. First of all, I hope that in this very healthy relationship in which you're not using protection, you have already had the talk on whether you wanted children or not. Secondly, that argument doesn't work anyway. Like, first of all, what do you mean by an equal say? Like, if she doesn't want to keep it and you do, then what? Like, are you going to respect what she wants? Or are you going to go all debate me bro on her and pressure her into having a conversation in which you can guilt, coerce or pressure her into doing something that A, she doesn't want to do, B, could very heavily limit her life and career goals, and C, cause her significant physical harm and emotional damage. The man should get an equal vote goes right out the window because of the exclusive experiences, health risks, and trauma caused by pregnancy and abortion immediately throws out any claim of equality in any sense of the word. Pregnancy itself comes with a lot of discomfort, pain, possible permanent bodily damage, and even risk of death. If your partner is not comfortable in going through pregnancy for any reason, then there should be no ethical reason why you would want to put them through that against their will. And if you're the kind of person who believes she really ought to get pregnant just because you wanted them to, then you never really had a partner. You had a woman in your life who you believed was subservient to you and your goals, even if it meant risking her health and her life. And I hope for their sake they get as far away from you as possible. Another argument I see online is, well, if she didn't want to have a child, she shouldn't have had sex. Okay, well, there's a few things wrong with that statement that I want to get into. One being this puts the responsibility on her and only her, and not the man who got her pregnant. So what you're saying is he can ejaculate inside of her, probably without her permission, due to her not wanting to be pregnant, but he gets to take no accountability for any of the consequences. And let's not forget how easy it is for the man to decide to try and knock her up against her will, even if the sex was consensual. Okay, and let's talk about consent. Unprotected sex, which results in an unwanted pregnancy, implies that it was very spur of the moment as neither party had protection, right? So what does this imply? Either that they were both really horny and acted on impulse, which is completely fine by the way, or one party managed to convince or pressure the other party into it, whether through manipulation or coercion, with no regards to potential consequences such as pregnancy. And seeing how in this argument she's the one seeking an abortion, it probably wasn't her doing the coercing, was it? Saying she shouldn't have had sex if she didn't want to get pregnant, but not saying he should have fucking consent to fucking impregnate her is fucking disgusting. Women are allowed to have sex if they want to without having a child if they don't want to. We all are. Okay, but what if the roles are reversed? What if she's the one who wants the child but he doesn't? What if she's the one baby trapping him? A big fear that I've seen in many men is that they'll be tricked by their girlfriends or wives or one night stands or what have you into getting them pregnant. Or will actually have their sperm stolen from their condoms or whatever in what is called, the worst word I've ever heard, spurgling. I hate this word so much that I will not be saying it again unless I'm trying to induce vomiting. So let's break down these fears and put them to bed, shall we? First of all, why? Well, despite the one-sided nature I kind of presented in these videos, women actually want kids too. The whole fear of baby trapping is kind of like a role reversal from like the 1950s, which tantamount to being forced into a relationship or a marriage, or being forcibly required by law to provide the baby's mother with an income via child support. And none of these really make a lot of sense if you stop to think about it. In terms of being forced into a relationship or her desperately clinging onto a dying relationship, nothing is actually stopping men from just getting up and disappearing after she announces she is pregnant. In fact, and this might surprise you, this actually happens quite a lot. No, in this aspect, I also believe the man could be feeling as though he is being put into a moral obligation to step up into his societal role as provider for his family, because he believes this is what is expected of him. Like a man who has internalized his gender roles but isn't ready to step up and take on all that responsibility at the cost of his freedom just yet. Or he just doesn't want to be perceived as an asshole for just walking out, or weak for not taking responsibility. But, and this is important, thinking of all these moralistic and societal obligations that keep him trapped in this relationship now that he's gotten her pregnant, but what he is not thinking about is, oh, he could have just worn a condom. Oh, but she said she was on the pill. Seems to be a very common sentiment through the many, many anecdotes of men being baby trapped that I have read, as though contraception is entirely her responsibility. And, not anything that he should have considered at any point. No, God forbid he should take any precautions. It's all her fault. Although I find it pretty ironic that men will fear being baby trapped because they don't want the responsibilities that come with fatherhood, when they easily could have just avoided the situation altogether by being responsible and wearing protection. In many of these stories where men are suspecting they have been baby trapped, the question being asked is, was the pregnancy an accident or was it secretly purposeful? Common sense should state that if pregnancy could have been accidental, then you were aware that pregnancy was a possibility and just decided to not take any precaution. This question was also proposed in a hilariously bad article titled 8 Red Flags the Pregnancy is a Trap. Then was immediately followed up with, what signs is someone faking a pregnancy? That sounds like a question a teenage incel who has only just learnt about baby trapping would spout to every single one of their male friends who has just successfully hooked up with one of his crushes. In fact, this whole article sounds like something out of the manosphere. This trap may be direct or indirect. A direct trap would be that the pregnancy is intended to secure your relationship or financial support. An indirect trap would be that the primary objective is motherhood. Your being trapped into fatherhood may be extraneous to that objective. Your seed is necessary for her motherhood, but beyond that, you may or may not be relevant to her. A lot of this is just really bad women be lying y'all rhetoric, using every little reason to distrust your partner. Like baby trap red flag number 3, she has something to gain from being your baby mama, such as fulfilling her dream to be a mum.
It's a red flag.
And if this doesn't scream incel, I don't know what does. Baby trap red flag number 5. She seduced you.
It's a trap!
Listen fellas, if you don't want kids, just use protection. Or maybe if you didn't want to have kids, maybe you shouldn't have had sex. See how moronic it sounds when it's directed at you? Yes, condoms suck, but you know what sucks even more? Unwanted pregnancy. And if the relationship is already in a really bad state anyway, having kids is only going to make things harder and more stressful, and the relationship probably isn't going to last much longer anyway. So yeah, it's really not much of a motivator for her in that regard anyway. Yeah, sure, back in the day, pregnancy would typically result in provision and marriage, but that was during the same time period when women could rarely leave the house or make their own money. And as I pointed out in part 1, as women's rights and freedoms increased, successful marriages declined, which heavily suggests that it wasn't the women pressuring the men into staying together and having children. Okay, but there are other reasons why women might trick men into having their baby. Like, what about child support? She's only using me to take my money. Well, that also doesn't work because children are really fucking expensive and looking after one is a full-time job. Sorry, but your few $100s a month isn't going to fund her never-ending holiday and lavish lifestyle. No, having and raising a child usually means sacrificing all of your time and energy and probably money too. There is no overall financial gain for a woman into tricking a man into knocking her up, unless he happens to be very wealthy and very willing. And even then, this would still be a very rare scenario, as she would still be tied down into raising a child. Also, wealth just doesn't seem to be worth it for a lot of women, as I pointed out in part 1. When I had shown that it was Elon Musk, the wealthiest man in the world, who was struggling to convince women to have his child despite offering millions of dollars. Let me repeat, one of the wealthiest men in the world was offering millions of dollars to a woman to let him impregnate them, and he was still publicly rejected. Bro, it is very unlikely she is baby trapping you for your money. But what if she stole your sperm from your condom or off her belly or whatever? Well, while terrifying, this isn't really feasible either, as sperm will die within minutes once exposed to air and temperatures below that of basic human body temperature, like room temperature for example. So if you quickly clean up after yourself, you're safe. In very rare occasions, sperm can survive inside of a condom for up to a few hours, but this is very difficult, as not only do you have to prevent air from getting in, you also have to maintain temperature around human body temperature. Most condoms are made out of latex, which acts as a barrier to nutrition that is required to keep sperm alive. And the lube from pre-lubricated condoms also just directly kills the sperm as well. So in a hypothetical that she is trying to steal your sperm from your used condom, she would have to act very fast, like a few minutes at most, which would be really hard to do if she was trying to do it in secret. So yeah, she probably ain't trying to steal your jizz, buddy. And also, let's not forget, so many women don't even want kids today. Kids kneecap careers, grossly limit basic freedoms, and the workload is just a lot. And statistically speaking, it is the woman who is expected to do most of the work, even if she is working a job as well. And on top of that, the act of childbearing and giving birth can come with a range of physical afflictions, issues, and injuries. But Ben, I hear you say from wherever you are, women have babies all the time. They're built for it. Why do you keep carrying on about it as though it's so dangerous? Well, the cost of pregnancy, or why forcing women to have children is bad, actually. Now, you would think something as common and as important as giving birth, that the medical procedures for creating new humans would be very well developed and regulated to ensure that giving birth would be as comfortable and as risk-free as possible. And even so, childbirth is such a fundamental part of, well, all our lives, that it must be easy, right? And I suppose it would hurt for a little while, but hey, they'll get over it. And once they meet their little mini them, they'll quickly forget all about the pain and discomfort they just endured and live happily ever after, right? Yeah, well, no. I would like you to imagine, if you will, sudden fatigue, back pains, frequent nausea, something swelling up in your stomach to a size that puts actual physical pressure on your bladder, lungs, and abdomen, causing far more trips to the toilet and difficulty breathing. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night with an urgent need to piss, but you're struggling to get out of bed because you're finding it really hard to breathe. Oh, and you got to carry around an extra 7 to 18 kilos that your muscles and body just aren't used to moving around. Yeah, sure, for a little while that's just inconvenient, but to go through that for several months with a sudden and drastic physical and hormonal shift doesn't sound easy any way you put it. Not to mention having to give up many of your favorite foods, alcohol, and coffee. Yeah, nah, fuck that. I need my coffee. This sounds unpleasant enough for someone who wants kids, let alone somebody who doesn't. And that's only the pregnancy itself. A common statement that I have seen is, women are built for it. They are designed to have children and give birth. And while female reproductive organs do indeed allow the creation and birth of children, so in that regard, sure, they are built for it, but that does not mean childbirth is easy, painless, devoid of severe physical damage, lasting decades or in some instances a lifetime. Oh, and death. Yeah, birth can literally kill. Still, in this day and age, death related to pregnancy and childbirth, known as maternity-related deaths, can and do occur anywhere during pregnancy and officially up to 42 days after giving birth. This metric is used by the World Health Organization. However, this doesn't mean that deaths caused by childbirth end after 42 days, as I'll get into in a bit. Health problems, injuries, and death up to 12 months after giving birth are also considered maternity-related as well. According to an article by Commonwealth Fund, the US gets to claim the highest maternity-related death count with 17.4 maternal deaths for every 100,000 live births, or about 1 in 5,747, whereas the UK had 6.5 per 100,000 live births, or about 1 in 15,384, and here in Australia we have 4.8 per 100,000 live births, or about 1 in 20,833. The same article states that out of all the maternity-related deaths, approximately a third occurred during pregnancy, about 17% occur during the birth, and then the remaining 52% occur postpartum or after the delivery. A lot of the deaths are preventable simply by having more midwives and obstetrician gynecologists, which I'll just be calling obgyns from here on out, on staff. The US has only approximately 11 obgyns and 4 midwives per 1,000 live births. The second lowest out of all of the most developed countries, right behind Canada. And while this certainly would greatly help reduce the maternity-related death count, this isn't really enough. Of course, having more midwives on staff to give more medical attention and care to people who are pregnant, giving birth, or recovering after giving birth would be extremely useful in reducing harm. The real issue is ingrained systemically, and that is the internalized bias against women and non-white people in medicine still to this day. I hate that I have to say this, I really do, because I know how it sounds, but the medical treatment of patients in Western countries, especially the US, has always centered around white men.
Man.
During the 1800s, decades after anesthesia became the norm, doctors still wouldn't use it on women during childbirth. They didn't consider it necessary because prevailing religious beliefs suggested women should suffer during labor and delivery. They would also chalk up any deaths related to childbirth as a natural part of the process, rather than explore any advancement in treatment or procedure. Unlike, for say, every single other disease or surgery ever, any emotional or sexual behavior portrayed by women that wasn't in the societal norm would have them diagnosed with hysteria, which was just an umbrella term to mean any non-physical condition or illness, or even just a strong emotional state for any reason at any time. Hysteria isn't even a real condition, by the way, and was removed from the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders in 1980. But the notion that a woman seeking medical aid or treatment is hysterical still seeps its way into modern treatment, as women are far more likely than men to not be taken seriously when seeing a doctor, or a higher chance of being misdiagnosed or diagnosed at a much later date than men. Meaning, in cases like cancers, the disease could have spread much further and caused a lot more bodily harm, or become untreatable entirely. Houston's VA Medical Center said the following: "When talking to people who have been misdiagnosed, one of the things we hear over and over is, 'The doctor didn't listen to me.' It's not just women, people of color and trans people are also much more likely than men to have to wait longer for a diagnosis or just be misdiagnosed entirely." Now, this is for two main reasons. The first, albeit lesser reason, is classism. Those with less money obviously have less access to high quality doctors, hospitals, and treatment. The wealth disparity between white and non-white people in the West is vastly imbalanced, to say the least. Data from a 2020 report by the Federal Reserve showed that the financial well-being of a white family home was on average 5 times greater than that of Hispanic families and 6 times greater than that of black families. I don't want to get into the correlation of race wealth disparity in the West, for that is its own discussion for another time, but it is a factor to consider in access to better quality medical treatment. But the more glaring issue for anyone who isn't a white man to be taken seriously, misdiagnosed, or have to wait much longer for a diagnosis is just internalized bias. Most models in medical textbooks are white men. Most training patients are white men. And due to slight differences in biological men and biological women, it can be harder to identify symptoms in these women when you have been trained to look for these symptoms predominantly in males' bodies. A difference in skin complexion can mean it's harder to see coloration or rashes, etc. on darker skin when you are used to scanning lighter skin where these elements are much more visible. Due to to this, black people receive a far less timely diagnosis and increased misdiagnosis on diseases such as Lyme disease and cancer. And as a result, are 3 times more likely to die from melanoma than white people. So while the doctor who misdiagnosed might not necessarily be malicious towards darker skinned people, they very well could be trained in a very biased way. That means they are not considering or just ignoring a more thorough examination of non-white people. Internalized race bias and of course full-blown racism is definitely a major key factor as well. So to summarize, we have biased medical training in which white men are the default patient when learning medicine, which means far less consideration and less thorough examinations when considering anybody else, as well as women not being taken seriously or listened to when seeking medical aid. In 2020, there was a study by Dr. Monica Goyle that shown that black children were less likely to be accurately diagnosed than white children for appendicitis within the same hospital. I've personally had appendicitis, and do you know how they diagnosed me? Well, it was surprisingly simple. After informing the medics that I had really severe stomach pains that started in the center of my gut and then moved off to the side, they just applied pressure on my stomach in various places to locate the pain, and that is literally all they needed for a diagnosis. Oh, and if it doesn't get treated almost immediately, you just die, by the way. So if your racist ass is misdiagnosing children with appendicitis just because they are black, get the fuck out of medicine right now. Although few doctors deliberately discriminate against women or minorities, Goyle said, many are biased without realizing it. Racial bias is baked into our culture, Goyle said. It's important for all of us to start recognizing that. This is a strong example of systemic racism, and this applies to misogyny as well, in how it internalizes in even well-meaning people. And we can see this more blatantly in doctors and hospitals because it can be such a fast-paced, high-stress environment. So it is a lot harder to consciously override these biases. Karen Lutfi Spencer, professor of health and behavioral sciences at the University of Colorado, Denver, puts it like this. Demanding schedules which prevent doctors from spending as much time with patients as they'd like can contribute to diagnostic errors. Doctors are more likely to make biased decisions when they are busy and overworked. Back in 2008, Spencer and her colleagues conducted an experiment in which they had 128 general physicians view recordings of actors of different race, gender, age, and social economic status to present themselves in 2 scenarios. One where they have coronary heart disease, or CHD, and one where they have depression. The doctors had to view these, make a diagnosis, and then state their confidence in their diagnosis, and then state their next actions to follow up on a treatment. And of course, a stronger confidence in your diagnosis means less hesitance to follow up tests, prescriptions, or just treating the patient generally. The heart disease was accurately diagnosed 95% of the time. However, despite showing the same symptoms, the doctors were less confident in their diagnosis on black people and women than they were with the white men. This was also the case with the depression diagnosis, but to a much lesser discrepancy. Now, what this does suggest is that there is a bias in medicine, intentional or otherwise. And these results came from an experiment in a zero pressure environment. And when you are overworked and you are seeing multiple patients a day, you're going to be a lot more stressed, and those biases are going to come out a lot more blatantly, regardless of intention. This is why, in the US, Indigenous women are twice as likely to die a maternity-related death than white women, and black women are nearly 4 times more likely to die a maternity-related death compared to white women. Okay, so that might have been a long tangent about systematic bias in medicine, but I really wanted to drill in the point that medical treatment for women comes with an unfair and unnecessarily added risk of professional dismissal or neglect, which, regarding somebody's health and well-being, is a terrifying roll of the dice. And expecting these women to go through medical practices that have never favored them to even risk their lives over an unwanted pregnancy is just simply vile. So what's actually causing the deaths from childbirth and pregnancy? Well, most commonly it is from bleeding out or the wounds getting infected after childbirth. High blood pressure is another reported cause, as it can cause a myriad of issues, including heart failure. And of course, these issues also occur from bad, unsafe abortions. Because just because abortions are made illegal doesn't mean women are going to stop having them. They're just going to be unregulated and more dangerous. Another maternal related death that I feel doesn't get as recognized as much is suicide. Suicide is officially considered by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare as a major cause for maternal related deaths. Their 2022 report showed that of all maternal related deaths, 11% were from mothers taking their own life. In the US, the National Library of Medicine looked at maternal related deaths for 12 months after childbirth and noticed that suicide was noted as the highest cause of deaths postpartum at 20 to 30%. Ah yes, the US, whose maternal related deaths have been increasing every year despite a global decrease of about 40%. The same country who is currently in the process of trying to completely ban abortion and withholding funding from Title X, which is a government program that was created in 1969, which allowed for the distribution of free birth control to people who are struggling and impoverished and so on. The lack of funding has caused clinics and organizations to shut down, as well as the cuts to Medicaid, making birth control very inaccessible to millions of people in the US currently. But I digress. Maternal suicide is a very real issue and occurs from a multitude of compounding reasons. Aftercare for new mothers is very limited. Societal support is very limited. Basic mental health care, such as sleeping regularly, exercise, and eating well, becomes nearly impossible when looking after a newborn. Financial stress increases as expenses increase significantly, while also being unable to work as, looking after a newborn is a full-time job. And in the cases for some women, this is all being pushed onto them despite them not wanting this at all. And now they're very likely going to have to forego their career, as statistically speaking, it is usually the mother who is expected to stay home to look after the baby. And sure, she could go back to work at some point, right? But that's still work hours and experience she has sacrificed, and career opportunities she has sacrificed, such as promotions or establishment. And it is unlikely to build a successful career later on in life when you have not been in the workforce for so long. And in a case where she was coerced into having/keeping the child, it is not a stretch to assume that her partner is coercive, pressuring, or controlling in other aspects of her life as well. And if that is the case, she is now basically trapped in an abusive relationship because of a baby she didn't want in the first place. With these scenarios in mind, it's not surprising in the very least that many new mothers go through postpartum depression. But let's move on and talk about the aftercare. A common misconception about childbirth is that the recovery process is very straightforward and only takes about 6 to 8 weeks before full recovery. However, this just isn't the case a lot of the time, and the notion that it is just completely undermines any risks and harm towards the childbearer even further. The size and weight of a small human being being carried around and pushed out of another human's body can cause some real structural damage to the pelvis and bladder, which can cause a lot of problems way past the considered recovery time. Who knew? In far too many cases, symptoms don't arise till years after the fact, even going as far as 15 years in some cases. Issues include weak bladder, stool leakage, and pelvic collapse/prolapse. And many of these issues require physical therapy or even surgery to address. In the West, medical after treatment plans are pretty lacking. In the US, it used to just be one trip to the clinic 6 weeks after giving birth. But recently they have actually improved things with a checkup 3 weeks after giving birth and then ongoing care as needed. Here in Oz, it's still just one appointment 6 to 8 weeks thereafter. So I guess I'll give the US a point there. And that's 1 point. However, in the US, if you want to give birth to a child, it can cost $3,000 to $5,000 on average to utilize such services as midwives and use of a hospital. Whereas for us Australians, it costs us about $300 to $500. So that's another point to us. And I only just learned this, but in my state of New South Wales, since 2019, new parents can receive for free a baby bundle, which includes a shoulder bag, a sleeping bag, a first aid kit, a baby toothbrush, breast pads, a face cloth, baby wipes, mercury-free thermometer, baby books, medical creams and sanitizer, and a change mat, all free. Okay, and that is pretty cool. And another point to Australia. I guess you could say that's the real bundle of joy. And now Australia loses a point. But this little gift aside, having a child is very expensive. The initial startup costs in investing in a human life is in the thousands. A study conducted by Westpac, so take this with a grain of salt, and a personal loan with a 6.49 interest rate for new customers showed that on average, parents will spend just shy of $8,000 preparing for a baby, with an additional $600 a month afterwards. You know, on top of their current expenses as well, obviously. This also didn't include any of the extra little things you might want during a pregnancy, such as like extra meals or snacks, you know, parent classes, or additional health and skincare products. So if we are encouraged to have more children, how are we going to pay all these extra hidden fees? Because keep this in mind, as of the writing of this, which is probably several months before you're seeing this, the average cost of living in Australia for a single person is over $2,200 a month, and just under $5,200 a month for a family of 4. Maternity leave is a thing for most of us here in Australia, but just does not cover the ever increasing costs we are all struggling with. In Australia, we are entitled to a government funded maternity leave for up to 120 days, which will be divided between each parent, in which you will be paid the national minimum wage. So as of the writing of this, one payment would be $915.80 for a 5-day work week.
$900 dues!
And this is available on top of your current pay if you are also currently working. Of course, maternity leave varies country to country. In the UK, you can receive up to 90% of your pay before tax for the first 6 weeks, and then about £187 per week for another 33 weeks, which is the equivalent of about 390 Australian dollars per week. The average cost of living in the UK for a family of 4 is just under $5,900 per month, and that does not include rent either. And in the land of opportunity, you receive a middle finger and a hospital bill. You also get the sense of pride of being a parent. Okay, that's not entirely true. 12 states do enforce maternity leave. It is typically for about 12 weeks, but the details do vary state to state. And everywhere else, it is really up to the company that you work for and their policy on the matter. You know, the best way to conduct accessibility for our very basic needs is through permission of large corporations. The average cost of living for a family of 4 in the US is a whopping 6,500 Oz bucks per month before rent. You would think that if more women having more children was so important, there would be a much smaller financial barrier, wouldn't you? But hey, if there's money to be made, you best be sure that they'll do whatever they can to squeeze out every penny. Even if it seems contradictory to be taking what they can from the working class of tomorrow before they are even aware of their own existence. But it's actually not contradictory at all, as it reinforces the dependency of labour and wages onto the parents. Just a little reminder that the existence of their child must be earned through domestic labour or their labour value. But therein lies the biggest contradiction of the pro-family principle under capitalism. Capitalism needs more children so we can have more people to generate more wealth and capital. But due to the black hole of constantly increasing profit margins, it is becoming increasingly less viable to have children financially. At least until the corporations completely take over, in which children will be taken away from their parents right at childbirth and raised in glorified childcare centres until they reach the ripe old age in which they will be sent off to the compounds to go live with the other workers who all live, eat, sleep and work within private, gated off, corporately owned communities, working day in and day out to earn their food and shelter privileges, lest they be thrown out of the compound into the wild, where where they must fend entirely for themselves, literally walled off from any accessible resources, as by this point the corporations have completely monopolized all the food, all the power, and all the clean drinking water, and keep them heavily secured under lock and key against the other corporations they are at war with. Okay, I don't think that's what's really going to happen. I'm not that pessimistic. Besides, we're all going to die from war and climate change long before anything like that ever happens anyway. So until then, just let women do what they want with their bodies. And guys, if you are so desperate to keep your legacy alive, just remember this. It doesn't matter how many children you have. Nobody's going to know who the fuck you are 100 years from now. No one. Okay, I'm starting to get a little bit negative, so I'll finish up with something I found quite interesting in my research. A Chinese tech company, Kaiwa Technologies, and if I said that wrong, get used to it, because that's how I'm going to be saying it from here on out, has been developing a pregnancy AI robot with the concept of conceiving and carrying a fetus for 10 months right up until birth, utilizing an artificial womb and uterus. A prototype is planned to release in 2026. This whole process would be very similar to like artificial insemination in practice. However, an artificial body would also carry and nurture the fetus, denouncing any health risks to the mother. Now, this does sound kind of dystopian, especially given any of the implications of anything I was like joking about just before. And I am personally quite skeptical of any claim or accomplishment of this level of technology, especially when interviewed, the CEO wouldn't disclose any details on various things such as like how the sperm and the egg would merge or interact during the conception phase. And like any aging adult, I'm concerned for the motives behind this kind of technology, as well as what like this could make our future look like. But this technology, if real of course, does have a lot of progressive potential, i.e. the removal of some of the reproductive labor and therefore gender roles imposed onto women. This would also allow those who are infertile for like one reason or another to possibly have biological children they once thought were never an option for them. But of course, like all technology, if this is to be used in a progressive way, it would need to be accessible for most, if not everybody. And I personally have a hard time imagining that anyone who isn't wealthy or that of a higher status having a high-tech AI pregnancy robot as a legitimate option when wishing to conceive. The pricing for such a device is estimated by Kaiwa Technologies to only be just under $14,000 US, which is typically way cheaper than surrogacy. However, let's be real, with both the cost of living and luxury rising as it has been over these last few years, chances are the price tag is going to be a lot higher. And even if this is intended for Joe Public in the West, there will be legal roadblocks that very well may prevent it from reaching our nations to begin with. First of all, with the tariffs in the US, exporting this kind of technology will be incredibly less financially feasible. Secondly, if you look at how things are in the West right now, rights for women, LGBTQ people, and immigrants are being stripped away at an alarming rate due to the right wing dominating the current political climate in the West. Mostly in the US, but they are still the powerhouse of Western nations, despite being systematically worse in every other way. The people in power are the ones trying to strip away abortion rights and birth control rights and are trying to reinforce reproductive labor onto women. Like, do you really think they're going to let robots take away that reproductive labor from women? Do you really think they're going to allow that kind of technology into our society, given the chance? And there's already a whole bunch of concerns that people are bringing up with the whole pregnancy robot thing. But these people are trying to make it sound a lot more sinister than it really is. One big question they like to bring up is, well, where is the robot going to get the eggs from to conceive? A likely explanation that it would be a similar process to that of IVF surrogacy, where a woman has her eggs removed and then fertilized in a lab and then put into a surrogate mother. And I assume the artificial uterus and womb would just act as that lab, as that is just the simplest explanation I can think of. And I do like me some Occam's razor. However, this question only came up probably due to a misunderstanding of the CEO when he was describing the purpose of the robot. Also, just a heads up, I've got no idea how to pronounce the CEO's name, so I'm just going to refer to him as the CEO as I read this quote. In fact, the CEO, founder of Kaiwa Technology, says his product will assist not only men who are looking for a non-traditional wife, but also women who want a child but do not want to become pregnant. And it seems to me that I think people took this to mean that it both can satiate lonely men and provide the means to conceive and carry a fetus simultaneously. But if you really look at what he said, he was really just listing two separate uses for it. And this is exactly what the CEO himself said. Some people don't want to get married but still want a wife. Some don't want to be pregnant but still want a child. So one function of our robot wife is that it can carry a pregnancy. Of course, a woman would have to donate her eggs for fertilization. So yeah, the concerns for women's eggs regarding the robot are pretty unfounded. Another fear that critics have is that this robot will replace real women, as lonely single men will no longer need to seek out real women, as they can just partner off with these robots instead. And well, to that I say, let them. So what is actually being replaced here? Like, let's actually stop and think about it. Well, the roles and expectations these lonely men originally projected onto the women who didn't want them in the first place. If he is willing to marry a robot who is a literal subservient, glorified sex doll with no agency, then that to me says a lot about what he sees a woman to be and what he expects from her. So maybe let these incels have their robot wives and keep them from harassing real women. Okay, that's me. Not every lonely guy is an incel. But the point I'm trying to make is robots such as this pregnancy robot are not replacing women, due to women being more than the implied status of a robot, incapable of defiance, agency, or consent. And how the people who believe that women are comparable to a robot, incapable of defiance, agency, or consent, are probably lonely for good reason.
Hey, you want me to teach you some bedtime songs? If you leave me now, you take away the biggest part of me. Ooh.
But that doesn't mean these robots aren't replacing women. I hear you mumble in your sleep at night. With advancing technology, soon these robots will be able to cook and clean for us, and very soon we won't need women at all. And that argument just circles back around into the whole discussion of enforcing gender roles and domestic labor onto women, which is what this whole childbirth thing has been about. And if you think women are only good for taking care of your domestic chores and having and nurturing your children, then it's not a woman you need in your life, bro. No, I know what you need. Here, start with this resource I'll put on screen, or I'll put a link to it on screen or something for you. Remember when I was doing title cards and I kind of just stopped about a quarter through the video? Well, now I'm bringing them back. Conclusion. Okay, so what was the takeaway from all of this? Well, if you were paying attention, hopefully you learned that when it comes to discussion of abortions, birth control, and the declining birth rates, it all just really boils down to conservative rhetoric and upholding patriarchal hierarchies by trying to control women's autonomy over their bodies. Now, is this the specific goal that everybody desires when they are trying to push women to have more children? Probably not. But those patriarchal and misogynistic views are implicit within those values. So when it comes to campaigning against the declining birth rates and long-termism, these people are really just trying to find intellectual or scientific ways to structure their beliefs to convince more people to be on board with what is essentially just controlling women's bodies. And once you see that, it's really hard to unsee. Technology such as pregnancy robots does yield a lot of potential for the near future. Women who might have been unable to conceive on their own, or women who wanted children but didn't want to go through pregnancy, could now each have more options moving forward. And it is options such as this which will actually help increase the birth rates. Of course, the bigger issues remain. Under capitalism, technology like this will probably be very inaccessible for most people, while the working class is digging further and further into poverty each and every year. And in a dystopian worst case scenario, this kind of technology could be used as a factory of sorts to just pump out new laborers constantly. And as silly as that sounds, my point is, part of fighting for women's rights and freedoms is to fight the overwhelmingly oppressive nature of capitalism itself. Whether that be a sci-fi pregnancy robot dystopia or a nuclear family modeled society. But people still hold onto these ideals, such as the nuclear family model. They believe it works. They believe the gender roles imposed on all of us is what keeps the world spinning. I already talked about why gender roles are bad in my trans video, so I won't go into it here, but those gender roles require the heavily outdated binary system, and that the individual must earn the title man or woman by doing certain things and behaving in certain ways. And while this has shown to be terribly unhealthy for both men and women, it also requires women to be beneath and depend on men. Controlling women and burying the existence of trans and NBs isn't the end game. It is just part of the process of the capitalistic machine. The concern for the declining birth rates is just a piss poor attempt in trying to convince people to get back in their place and perform their roles. The population is currently so big that it will be millennia before it even starts to be an issue. And that is assuming we don't develop some kind of technology that could enable the birthing process in a way that is much more accessible and safe. Like, I don't know, pregnancy robots. I don't know, just an idea. No, it was never about the birth rates. Birth rates started to decline as women's rights and freedoms increased. Independent women go against the nuclear family structure, which goes against the binary role system, which goes against the binary roles and therefore goes against capitalism. That's why women's rights to abortion have been taken away in the US. And that's why procreating has not become cheaper or safer. It was never about the birth rates.